This has been a red letter day in my diary for a long time now, and I'll explain why in a minute. But you see, I used to live just literally behind this church in Sutherland Road, overlooking the Grove, and they were truly the happiest and probably the very best years of my life. Well, I'll explain about that. But I'd like to tell you what I do now. So I want to ask my colleague Carol to come up. You'll recognize her if you looked at some of those leaflets. We've got a... We both work for a charity called Beauty from Ashes, which is something that I began to do when I left living in Tunbridge Wells, just behind the church here. And, well, it's hard to explain what it is. We're mostly counsellors. I have no idea. We're mostly counsellors who work with me and other people with other skills. And we've all been through some major life quake. You know, earthquakes shake everything. Well, life quakes do much the same. So we've all been through one of those and come out the other side simply and only because in the middle of all the ruins and the mess, we found how wonderful the Lord is and how he helped us through. And we really just want to explain to other people how they can find that same inner strength to carry on with whatever life chucks at them. So we work together at Beauty from Ashes, and if you look in the leaflet, there's pictures of Carol too. So you say anything?
Well, yeah, I've had the joy of working full-time at Beauty from Ashes now for about 7 years, or perhaps more, I don't know. And I worked for about 3 or 4 years as a volunteer. But before that, I was a client. And I think I was probably one of the most scared clients ever. I'll tell you a bit about that. But the first time I made an appointment to see Jen, I was comfort eating so much, I ate 3 Cornish pasties that happened to be off and came down with violent food poisoning and had to cancel my appointment. Honestly, it's true. So that was rearranged. It was the 19th of December. And I came for my next appointment. And just up the road from Beauty from Ashes, there's a lay-by. And I pulled in there. I was a few minutes early. And I pulled in there and I was like, shall I go? Shall I not go? Shall I go? Shall I not go? And do you know that one decision has changed the whole course of my life? So never underestimate that one tiny decision that actually is the life changer. And I will talk a little bit in the second session about why I was so scared and what we can do with some of those emotions. But as I say, I've still no idea how it works, but all I know is that I have the absolute best job in the world because I get to see Jesus do miracles every day of my life. And it doesn't get better than that.
So I have a confession to make to you that, okay, I've just said the happiest years of my life were spent just behind this church. But I have to say the thought of going to live in Tunbridge Wells was the worst thought I could ever have had. I was born with green Wellington boots on. I love the country. I love the peace. I love to hear the fox barking and the owl hooting in the night. I just love the stillness of it. And the thought of coming to live in Tunbridge Wells, so close to the station, and all the busyness and bustle of it was the last thing I ever wanted. But sometimes the very last things we want in life turn out to be the very best. So that might be a word for somebody else too. We lived out in Mayfield, well, not quite in Mayfield, even in the country around Mayfield. And if you've ever been out that way, you'll know how enchanting it is and how quiet and still. We had 6 children, so the house wasn't all that quiet, I have to say. But our dream was the good life, you know, having our own chickens and ducks and a goat and dear knows what all else that we did. We grew our own veg and fruit. And I just thought life was as happy as it possibly ever could be. I had everything I'd ever wanted. I'd started a career of writing, but I was so busy with the children, the only time I could ever get to write was when they were all asleep at night, and I crawl up into the attic where I had a typewriter. Do you remember typewriters? Weren't they awful? Goodness me. I can't live one day now without my laptop, my iPad, and my phone. Oh, I hope it's not still in my bra. That's a good place to keep it. It always lives in there. You always know where it is then, but I think I took it out in time for today. But that's the only way I could write, and everything was perfect. And then suddenly, whoom, just like that. It happens sometimes in life. It was a life quake for me, big time. I got encephalitis, which is the actual inflammation of the brain itself rather than just the lining. And it's very often fatal, actually. I didn't know that as I dashed off in the ambulance. It was a horrible moment. All I could think of was, who will feed the children when they get home from school tonight? That's what you think as a mum, don't you? But I was away from the children for months, very, very ill. Because encephalitis, if you recover from it, very often leaves some organ of the body damaged. All kinds of different organs can be affected by it, but for me, it was the actual casings of my nerves, nerve casings. So messages couldn't get from my head to the rest of my body to make my arms and legs move properly. I was in a pretty bad state. And it was awful. Can you just imagine having 6 children and just not being able to get up and look after them? The worst were the boys. You know, you couldn't chase them anymore and give them a clout. I was helpless. And the worst part for me really was what it did for my faith in God. We went to a lovely church out in Mayfield, Coggins Mill, very happy there, lovely people, and they prayed for me that I would get better. And actually, I really thought that I would, because you do get better from things, don't you? I mean, every time, measles, mumps, anything, flu, you just get better eventually. But I didn't seem to, and it dragged on and on and on. But I always had hopes that at any time it would happen. And then after 2 years, I was sent up to the hospital in London where I'd been before for all kinds of tests, and they sweetly explained to me that that was it, that you do recover a bit in the first 2 years, but then you stick and you plateau out. And I wasn't probably going to get any better than that, ever. And I was still just in my 30s. I was horrified. It just felt like I'd given my whole life to God to serve him and to do anything. I was always used to be bustling around the village doing everything there was to do, and there's always a lot to do in a village. And suddenly he's thrown me on the scrap heap. Didn't want me anymore, didn't need me, and didn't listen to my prayers. So why did he not heal me? Isn't it difficult? Have you ever prayed long and hard for someone you love or for some problem in your family yourself, and nothing seems to change? And other people all seem to have such wonderful stories, don't they? And they give you books and things about it. And they say, oh, you just have a bit more faith, dear. Come on, praise the Lord a bit more. Don't pray a bit harder. And it doesn't change. And actually, something inside your heart closes down and it hardens. And the very last straw for me was the day that I went to church, and they sweetly explained that I couldn't sit with my 6 children in the pew, at the end of the pew in the aisle, because I was a fire hazard in my wheelchair. That definitely broke something in me, and I thought, if that is church, and if that's God, I really don't want to know anymore. It was an awful moment because, I'd been brought up in a Christian home, and I had only ever wanted to serve God and do things for him and live for him. But that was it. So I didn't go anymore. Plenty of good excuses, wasn't well enough, this, that, and the other. But I didn't go anymore. Have you ever gone through a period like that? Yeah. It's a funny, strange feeling because something goes wrong and you want to pray and you think, oh, no good, is it? That's no point. God isn't even there. And you feel a sort of loneliness for God, a kind of bereavement for God, and he isn't there. Oh, how I know what that feeling is like. And I think there was so much pain inside me, disappointment with God, disappointment that he hadn't come through for me in all the ways that I wanted him to. It's a huge thing, disappointment, isn't it? Disappointment with God, disappointment with your friends, with your church, with who you're married to, with life. It's a hard thing to live with, and we don't show it, do we? We stick it down in here. Yep, get on with life, but it's there. Well, anyway, that's how it was. And then my husband came up with this great idea that we moved to Tunbridge Wells. I am sorry. I have come to love the place very deeply. I promise you that. But it wasn't the country. And I wanted to be in the country, even if I couldn't go for walks in the woods and over the fields. But he felt and explained that it would be infinitely better if all the children could get themselves to school and to ballet and brownies and football and music. You know, all the things you're endlessly having to take them to. And in the country, you have to go in the car such a long way to get your children educated like that. And he thought it would be loads easier. So I said, there's only one house that I would ever move into in the whole of Tunbridge Wells, and that's Sally's house. Because we'd been to supper once with a friend of mine called Sally Dabson. She lived in Sutherland Road. And I looked round her house and I fell in love with it. And I thought, that is the most lovely house ever. I could live in that house, if only it wasn't in Tunbridge Wells. But of course it is so close to the Grove, and there was lots of Calverley Gardens too. It was okay. So I agreed, yes, we would put in a bid for that. And it was in a strange period. If you've ever moved house, you'll know what an odd vacuum you're in between the time when you have sold your house, but you haven't quite moved into the new house yet. And people treat you a bit differently too, really. You know, you're not there and you're not here, and you don't know where you belong. And it was in that period of time that I think I reached the lowest ebb ever. Absolutely ever. I was furious. I was so angry inside. But you know, you don't show anger, do you? When you're a Christian, because Christians don't get angry, do they? They're never depressed, they're never angry, and they're never afraid, and they don't worry. How marvelous. But when it's actually you, it doesn't quite work out like that, does it? I was all those things, but I squashed them down because I was a Christian. So I smiled beautifully on the outside and went along with everything. And we were in the middle of packing, you know, when you're packing up all those great big boxes and throwing things away and sorting things out. It was just about 2 weeks before we came here. And I'd had it. I knew inside, deep inside, there was a scream that was going to come, and it was going to be so loud, it would terrify my children. I needed to have the scream. Nowadays, when a scream like that hits me, I just drive onto the M25. It's a brilliant place to scream. Nobody ever hears you, and you can let out everything on the 25. But when you're in a wheelchair and you're stuck, absolutely no way can you scream like that. But I was fortunate at that stage. My muscles hadn't atrophied to the state where I could still use elbow crutches. So I thought to myself, I'll get out into the garden and there I will scream when I'm far enough away from the house and the children. So I wobbled my way out I'd had a massive row with my husband. I'd actually just tried to throw the steam iron at him. Have you ever thrown a steam iron at a husband? I'm sure you never have. You look such lovely people. But the passionately irritating thing was that it didn't even hit him. It fell on the ground and it sort of hissed and died. And he said, well, it'll take at least £5 to buy a new one. That's all he said. And my whole heart was broken. £5, it would have bought one. Wouldn't buy one now, would it? Never mind, it did then. And so I went out, I wobbled my way out, and at the bottom of the garden there was a dip, which was right next to a field where the cows lived. And there were beautiful willow trees at the end of the garden and in the field. And of course the cows simply loved to shelter there and do horrible things that cows do. They do it in the country, but they don't do it in Tunbridge Wells. Never. No. But it had been raining a lot and the cows had been very busy. And there was this, in the dip, there was this great thick sludge of stuff. And I actually fell in it. I didn't mean to. I sort of slithered myself in, and there I was in it. And I didn't have the sufficient strength in my arms and legs to be able to get out of it again. So I simply had to sit there until someone in the house realized that I wasn't there and came to find me. And that was when it happened. It was the most crucial and important moment in my entire life. Because there was me, I was all the anger and the fears, the disappointment, the sheer rage that I had been hiding away in here came boiling up. And I said some terrible words I didn't even know I knew. Inside all of our lovely, sweet Christian heads, there's a whole load of words we shouldn't want our grannies to hear. But they came up, and oh, how they did. Because I felt, in a way, this was symbolic, this stuff I'd fallen into. My beautiful, perfect, well-organized, lovely life had become nothing but, I won't say the word, but you know the word, and that's just what it was. And it was thick and it was horrible and it smelt and it was going down my neck and in sleeves and in my ears. Oh. Fortunately, I'd lost all sense of taste because of encephalitis, but there it was. And that's when it happened. I suddenly felt the presence of God, the God that I had totally given up on and forsaken and told to get lost. He was there. Do you know what I mean when I say about the presence of God? Isn't it a beautiful, incredible, amazing feeling? Just wraps you all around and you know He's there. And I was more conscious in that moment than I'd ever been before that I was loved. I knew God loved everyone in the world. Because we're taught that from children, aren't we? God is love. But I'd never really had the feeling that He loved me personally. And I knew that. At that moment, I knew it. He loved me. So, of course, what did I do? I started to grumble at Him. Wouldn't you? I'm afraid you wouldn't, but I'm sure I'm afraid I did. And I just said, why? Why haven't you healed me if you love me? Why would you let this happen to a woman with 6 children? Why? And I didn't hear a voice. I never have. If you hear the audible voice of God, I would so love to meet you, because lots of people do, but I never have yet. But I knew inside that He was saying to me, I know about the pain that you've got here. I want you to ask me to come into that pain. I want to be in that pain to help you. And I thought to myself, well, I'm a Christian. He's in my life, yeah. Oh. But then I did realize, of course, that The pain had become the central part of me, and it does, in a way, doesn't it? Problems get so big that they take over everything, and other things get pushed into the side. That pain had just become so big that I couldn't handle it anymore. But he wanted to come into that place and help me. So I just sat there, quite simply, in the stinky, bad word, and I just asked him to come in here, help me. And I do really believe that we all have a place like that somewhere. Maybe we can explore that a bit later, in the second session perhaps, where we do put the disappointment, we do put the fear and the anger, and all the things we don't want anyone else ever to see. We shove it, we hide it somewhere down in there. And we treat God as if he was just much too nice, like a nice aunt who can't be bothered with the raggedy, nasty, ghastly, disgusting stuff. So we have to sort of say nice things to him in a special voice. He isn't really like that. So I asked him to come in to that place. And oh, the difference that made in my life. I would love to say that from that moment I rose out of the bad word and I was completely healed. I mean, wouldn't that have made a good book? Oh boy, don't forget I was a writer. I could have made my fortune, see? Telling people to go and get baptized in cow dung, and they're bound to be better. It didn't happen, not that way. But something had changed inside me. Something had lifted. And when we've got all this gunge inside, we don't function very well. But God had taken it. So we moved to Tunbridge Wells, and within 2 weeks of being here, I wrote this in my diary. I'm happy. I never thought I could be happy again. It was true. I loved it. I loved it. I had a battery-operated wheelchair, and I used to buzz round the Grove. I could even get into, was it Safeways down the bottom? Is it still there? Yeah, oh, it is. I could get there. I could get my shopping. I felt independent. I had friends. I had fun. And I started to really write seriously because I had not able to do my own housework and things, so lovely DSS sent along carers to help me, so I could write full time. It was brilliant. No more getting up in the middle of the night into the attic. And I got a computer, and that was the best thing I ever did too. I started to write seriously and got books published, books for adults. And one was even a bestseller. It was called Beyond Healing. I'd got over the bump of only wanting God to heal me. And so I wrote in my diary, heal me if you want to, or use me as I am. And it didn't matter to me. Why did it not matter to me anymore? I think the answer came to me when we went away on holiday. It's not easy to go on holiday when you've got 6 children. Definitely not. And a wheelchair. No, believe you me, it's not. But we somehow managed it, and we went up and stayed in, I think it's Yorkshire, and we went to stay at a place called Malham. Anybody ever read The Water Babies when they were kids? Yeah, a little chimney sweep who got drowned in the river at the bottom of the cliff. Well, we stayed just where he drowned. Mind you, he wasn't still there and his body wasn't around, but it was a good place. And of course, they used to go out for walks every day, long walks, but I couldn't. So they would put a rug over my knees, give me a flask of tea and a book, and then say, goodbye, Mum, you'll be all right, won't you? And I would say, yes, I'll be fine. But I did mind, even with God's love to surround me. And then one day I was sitting there, and I just was having a bad moment, and I said, Lord, why? And he said, my love, I have many, many people who do all kinds of things for me. People who serve me, people who change the world for me. But I've got very few people I really could call my friends. my intimate friends. And that is actually what I want more. And I realized that in my wheelchair, I had far more opportunities simply to be his companion and his friend than ever I had when I was dashing around trying to change the world. So I settled down, and I was happy here because the most important thing I discovered was that intimate relationship. And it really is, isn't it? So many people say, I don't know what my ministry is. I don't know anymore what I ought to be doing. And I said, well, don't do anything, just keep God company. That is what he wants. And he loves it when we do. So that's what really came out of that time for me. Living here, back in Sutherland Road, was when I learned the most important thing in life is simply to be his friend. But he messed it up. Do you know what he did after 8 years of being stuck in this illness? God totally messed it up again, and he healed me. Can you imagine a writer who'd written a bestseller about not being healed, and suddenly I was healed? Most embarrassing. But actually, it certainly did very much help me as a writer, I have to say. Launched my career altogether because people had read the other book and then, oh, what's happened to Jen Larcombe? But that wasn't the point. It changed a lot of things because I realized that I had my life back. I thought it had been sort of, put on a bench. But what do you do when you've spent 8 years being ill and suddenly you're well again? It's an extraordinary feeling. And wherever I went around, he used to be a baker just up the bottom of the hill here. And I went in there one day and he said, excuse me, have you got a sister in a wheelchair? No, I said, it was me. And it was lovely to see the joy that brought to people who don't know God at all. And I thought, what do I do then? Do I go around the whole world and tell God he heals people physically? But that wasn't really what I most wanted to say, because I think it's wonderful when God heals people, and we do see him doing that at Beauty from Ashes, but that's only a body. And even though I was healed those years ago, look at me now. I've got something wrong with my spine, which makes my legs not work. None of our bodies are going to last forever, but the inside bit, that's the bit that does. And when God heals that, that's the big miracle. I wanted to tell people about that. And so I thought, what I really want to do is to find myself a little sanctuary somewhere, a little place where people can come and talk, perhaps people who've been disabled or their carers, just to come and say how they feel, people who are terminally ill, people whose marriages have broken up, people who are suffering because they've lost through death somebody they loved. Somewhere where they can just come and talk and be prayed for and be loved and be heard. That's what I want to do. So we found a little house on the side of Tunbridge, and that's what I'm still doing. And that's what Beauty from Ashes is. And I love it. I love it because just to see people receiving that touch from God makes a profound, big difference. And all of us, even those of us who've known God for years, we can so easily push him out onto the fringes of our lives, so easily. And we can lose that first love that we once used to have. And he longs for us to have that back. He longs to be in the very middle, the very center of our lives. And it's wonderful when people can do that, to see the peace and the change that comes over them, that haunted look in their eyes where they're not really sure. And I see that every day happening, and that's gorgeous. I should have retired by now, but how could I do that when I just love to see the people? I love praying for the people and being with the people. And a morning like this for me is intoxicating fun, because look at how lovely you are. I know so many of you from years back, And I'm so glad you came. But I'd tell you something even better news. It's time for coffee. Isn't that good? So we can have a break now. And some of the books that I've written since explaining how I found that healing and what God did for me, they're down there. And I don't want you to buy them so I can buy myself a new car. I just want all the money to go to Beauty from Ashes to help people who need to come. And so, come and chat. And then don't go away if you can possibly stay, because in the second session, it might be quite useful to hear more about that pain place and how God can shift that pain away, and other things as well. I think there's a box for questions, isn't there, Naomi? And so you might put some questions in about this and we could answer them. And also in the second session, there'll be time for you to have prayer if you wanted it. And please, you don't have to think up some awful situation to have prayer for. You don't have to work up a trauma. Just come and pray with us about your children, about your job, about how you're feeling, about anything that's good that's happening in your life, because we're here for that. And that's actually what we love to do the best. And there's a gorgeous team here from this church who pray with people too. So don't waste the chance while you've got it. So enjoy the coffee, and we'll see you again soon. Got questions which we're going to answer during the next session, but there's this just one which is just for me really, and it's, could you please explain more about how you felt when you said you were in the presence of God? Step up, step, okay. I didn't fall down yet, did I? So the best is yet to be, yeah. No. Well, what did I feel? Well, you see, I was, as I explained, very angry and desperately distressed at the time, and I was really just feeling anything but like being kind of godly, like when you go to church and you kind of put on a godly face. I was not having a godly face. And suddenly I just felt wrapped and enclosed and safe and understood and cared about. It was beautiful. I'm sure if we went round this whole room and said to lots of people, how do you feel God's love? How do you feel his presence? We'd all have a different way of saying it. And it's a beautiful thing. But I think an awful lot of people think, well, I never feel that, so maybe he doesn't love me, or maybe I've got it wrong, or maybe I'm not worthy. That is wrong, because he promised we would always have his presence with us, surrounding us, in front of us, behind us, underneath us, always have his presence. But he never promises anywhere in the Bible that we'd always feel his presence. That's the difference. Sometimes we can, at special times in our lives, I think we can have an awareness, an overwhelming awareness. For me, it came in the middle of the second song that we sang with that amazingly wonderful group of worship leaders that we've got. Right in the middle of the second song, whoa, it just came. But everybody feels it in a different way. So I'm asking the Lord every morning now, there's a very definite thing. I'm asking him, please may I have a conscious awareness of your presence today. I'm not asking that I'll go around feeling cloud nine and all floaty and surrounded by lovely feelings. I'm actually asking that I would just keep realizing he's there. And maybe that means smiling at him or that kind of a thing to him. You know, that's what I want. I want to really be sure that I know that he's with me every minute of the day, and he's with you.
Do you know, if I could have picked a theme song for my life, waiting here would pretty much have covered it. Because pretty much all of my life, and I'm really, really old, I have been waiting for something. From when I was very small, I waited to get my father's approval. Pretty much never came, actually. From when I was very small, I waited to look like other children. That didn't happen either. When I was at school, I waited for the bullying to stop, and that didn't happen. And I got married, and I married the most amazing man. And I thought, well, this will be it. But actually, that stuff here in that pain place that Jen's talking about, it doesn't go away, does it? You know, you can push it down, but it doesn't go away. And then I waited, and I waited, and I waited for children, because that was the desire of our heart, to have a big family. And then I got sick. And then I had a hysterectomy when I was in my 20s. So there were no children. And I went to Bible college. And I went to one of these churches, you know, these kind of mega churches. And if I told you where it was and who led it, you'd know. One of these really like. And the prophet of the house said to me when I was in Bible college, he said, I see you speaking to very large groups of women. And I was like, oh yeah, bring it on. This, at last, something good. And I waited. And I waited. And I thought, well, when I finish Bible college, the church will ask me to come and work for them, and that's what will happen. And I got to the end, and they didn't ask me to come and work for them. So I waited, and I waited. So to the person that put in the question saying you think you've missed your purpose in life and it's too late, prophetic word wasn't actually fulfilled until almost exactly 15 years later, when I walked out onto the stage of the NEC to talk to 750 women. But actually, when you wait 15 years to see something happen, you stop believing it, don't you? Yeah? You think, well, that was just another one of those disappointments, wasn't it? There are 3 words, 3, that strike fear into the heart of almost every woman. Communal changing room. That was me. That was me. See, when you wait for love and approval and it doesn't come, you have to find your comfort somewhere, don't you? Because we have here, right here, we have this desperate need for love and for comfort. And if it isn't given to us by the parents or the people that raise us or whoever it is, we actually go looking for that comfort somewhere else. For me, it was food. So I think I first went on a diet when I was 7. I was put on a diet when I was 7. But what that does, when you've been overweight your whole life, is it becomes your identity. Yeah? It becomes your identity. And all of the bullying, all of the vile names, all of the times that the chair breaks under you, all of the time that you can't fit in the chair, all of the time that you can't do up your aeroplane seatbelt thing, you take all of that pain and we push it into that pain place. And for me, it was all around weight. But for you, it'll be something different. Because your life isn't the same as my life. But we all have that same intense need for love and approval and affirmation and comfort. And when we don't get it, we take it all and we put it into this pain place. And I always imagine it like a cupboard here. It's just there. And when someone called me a vile name or one of those horrible things happened, I take it and I put it in the cupboard, lock the door. And in fact, early this morning, I had a picture for somebody here that I could see that your place of pain is like a strong box, like a large strong box. And I saw you putting ropes around it and trying to tie it up because the pain was trying to get out and you were putting ropes around it, trying to hold the pain in the box. Because that's what we try and do, isn't it? Because we have to. We have to go on functioning. So we take the pain and we push it down and down and down. Waiting. And the thing, when we're always waiting for the good things, and the good things never come, what we're left with is disappointment, isn't it? And I guess there's probably nobody in this room that hasn't suffered disappointment in their lives. And what do? We take that disappointment and we put it down here. And when nothing ever happened about that prophetic word I was given for years and years and years, I thought, well, it's just one more disappointment. And I took that disappointment and I pushed it right down into the pain place. When they told me that I couldn't have children, which was sensitively managed by the most horrible consultant that came and stood at my bed with an entourage of about 12 underlings. He never actually spoke to me, but he said, has she been told she'll never have children? And they all said, oh, yes. No. Actually, no. What do you do? What do you do with that when your dream has been for that family sitting around your scrubbed pine table and you're going to be the coolest parents ever? What do you do with that pain? What can you do with it? You take it, you put it in the pain place, and you turn the key again. And what happens as we move on through our lives, we get into the habit, we learn to put the pain in the pain place. And we put it in and we squish it down, to get more and more in there. Squish it down, we lock the door, and we think, right, I'll go on, I can go on, I'll go on, until the next happens. And then we put it in. So actually we end up with this kind of seething little cupboard. I don't know if a cupboard can seethe, but it seems to me it's like a seething cupboard. But can you imagine if you looked like I used to do? And you go to buy clothes, and actually buying clothes is the most horrendously ghastly experience my whole life long, because I was always buying clothes. Even when I was 7, I was buying 12-year-olds' clothes. And then the older you get, it's not a question of what would I like to buy in this shop. It's what might possibly fit me in this shop. You don't have choices. When you go into that most scary of places, a communal changing room, and then you think, do you know what? I'm just not going to do this. I'll just not bother. And you take that pain and you push it down into your pain place. And I'm just giving you the examples from my life. You know what's in your pain place. You know what it is that you've been waiting for God to do. And there's a little verse in Proverbs that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. When we have hope deferred, which is just another way of saying disappointment, it actually makes our hearts sick. We get sick in our hearts. And it changes the way we look at our life. Waiting. Then I came to Beauty from Ashes, and I eventually did get out the lay-by and into the prayer room. And I began to have to relearn a lot of things. Because the thing about the pain place is it lies to you. The pain place lies. It says you'll always be like this. It says there's no escape. It says there's only disappointment. So you have to start unlearning the lies that you've learned from the pain place. And it took a jolly long time. Because, my head believed that God loved me. Of course I knew that God loved me. But actually, did God love me? Me? Or did God have a contract to love everybody, and I was just the bad news in the small print? So you take it and you stuff it down again into the pain place. And after quite a long healing journey, things began to change as I very gradually got the courage to say to Jesus, okay, you can unlock the pain place and take out one thing, but one thing only. Just one, no more. Because when your life has been touched with that continuous cycle of disappointment, actually, you get very disappointed in God, don't you? You could have done something about this and you didn't. You could have made it that we could have had children and you didn't. So very gradually, it was allowing him just to take one thing at a time out of that pain place. And say, okay, how do you want to heal that? And there was a time in my life, many years ago, when I was on a retreat, way before I knew Jen and Beauty from Ashes. I was on this retreat in one of those monstrously uncomfortable Christian retreat houses. Do you think they make them really uncomfortable on purpose? Do you think they do? This, I'm not going to tell you where it was. In fact, truthfully, I don't think it's there anymore. But this was, oh my gosh. All the corridors had a tiny strip of lino down the very, very center, which actually you'd have to walk on it like this. And communal shower rooms and single beds that were like just sort of slabs of rock, really. But actually, it had been a really good retreat. Until the last night. And it just so happened that we were all sitting around that evening talking and planning and putting the world to rights the way you do. And everyone started talking about their lives and their families and their children, and it started feeling a bit bleak, really. So in the end, I got up and I went upstairs and got into I didn't use the communal shower room, but I got into my concrete slab of a bed. And I thought, well, this is a retreat. I better just sort of read something before I go to bed. So I picked up my Bible off the side of the bed and I opened it at random. And it was about this time of year. It was the end of May. So it had just recently been Easter time. And when I opened my Bible, it opened at Isaiah 53. Well, you know, we've just had Easter. And I'm sure every church, everything that service you were in over Easter, somebody read or spoke from Isaiah 53. Because we know, don't we, that he took our transgression and bore our iniquity. That's why we're all here. And I just read that verse. And I don't know if it was an audible voice, like Jen said. But if it wasn't, it nearly was. And the Lord said to me, do you believe that? I said, what? What? How can you ask me that? That's why I'm here. This is why I'm on a retreat. You know I believe it. My whole life is built on the fact that you took my sin and carried my iniquity. And he said, well, you can't believe that part of the verse unless you believe the part that goes before. You see, you're all trying to think now, aren't you? You're all trying to look on the page in your head and imagine, see what the verse that comes before is. It says, surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. Surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. Surely, and that word surely in the Hebrew means surely, certainly, absolutely, finally, and forever. He has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. So actually, when Jesus went to Calvary, he didn't just take my sin, he took my grief. He took my grief, which means that there is the same healing available for my grief as there is for my sin. And that's why we can invite him into the pain place. I'm just going to give you one example of somebody that I prayed with not that long ago. This was a lady probably in her late 60s, maybe a little older. And she had been brought up in the Welsh valleys. And she had gone to a small village school. And she said she was the child that always talked in class, you know. And she was always distracting the others and talking in class. And one day, her teacher just lost it. Now, if it happened in these days, we'd have some kind of investigation and all sorts of things, but things were different then. And so she was called to the front of the room, and he put her across his knee, pulled down her pants, and started to spank her in front of the whole class. And that shame, that absolute shame, had totally defined her. Because from that moment, she felt dirty. Because, you know, it was boys and girls in the class, and everybody had been able to see her. So we asked Jesus, would you come? Just take that one thing out of her pain place. What do you want to do about it? And it was as if she saw a sort of a film. Because she saw herself go forward and But then she saw Jesus open the door of the classroom and walk in, and he had 2 blankets, a pink one and a white one. And he hung the white blanket up so that nobody could see her, so that the other children in the classroom couldn't see her. And then he took the other blanket and he wrapped her in it. And he tucked her under the desk so she was safe. And then he took her place on the teacher's knee and took the spanking. Why? Because surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. So when we allow him, when we make that pain transfer, and I kind of think it a bit like a blood transfusion in reverse. So if I'm getting a blood transfusion, there's blood coming into me. But this is a reverse transfusion when the pain goes from me to Jesus. And once that pain goes to Jesus, then he can start to pour his love and his comfort and his healing into the place that shame had damaged on the inside of her. And it's kind of strange to say that somebody in their 70s can look different at the end of an hour and a half of prayer. But she did not look like the same woman. Why? Because that shame that had defined her since she was 7 years old had gone to Jesus. And his love and his comfort and his covering had taken its place. And really, that's what this type of healing is all about. My pain, my grief, my sorrow goes to Jesus. His love, his healing, his comfort comes to me. And the amazing thing about it is that because Jesus isn't in time like we are, the healing that little 7-year-old received in that film she was seeing in her head sort of carried forward through her whole life. So all of those damaging things that shame had done to her, and shame is a really corrosive thing, isn't it, when we carry shame? It's corrosive. But all of that had gone to Jesus, his love and his comfort. So she was no longer defined by her shame. And see, I don't look like that anymore. But because that had become my identity, that shame, that horror, all those terrible things had become my identity, even when I didn't carry all that weight, in my head and in my pain place, all that stuff was still there. So changing the outside of me didn't actually deal with the pain. Still in that pain cupboard inside of me were all the names I'd been called, all of the humiliating things. The time I went for a coffee with a friend and I sat into the chair, and when I stood up, the chair came with me. All of those things were still there. So what I was doing in that time, when I was a client at Beauty from Ashes, was really dealing with the true implications of looking like that. Because changing the outside of me didn't change who I was. And that's the thing, you see, that only Jesus can do. Only Jesus can take the pain. That there are lots of other really good strategies that we can have to recognize pain and manage pain. But nobody but Jesus can take pain. Surely He has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. Surely, certainly, finally and forever, he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. Do you remember the woman that had had the issue of blood for 12 years? Culturally, she would have had to live on her own. No one could touch her. If she ate out the same cooking pot as you, you would be defiled. The cooking pot would have to be destroyed. Nobody could touch her. She had to live completely alone, away from her husband, her children. She would have to live in complete isolation. That was her shame. So when she came looking to get healed by Jesus, she knew she couldn't go and ask him to get healed because nobody would let her go anywhere near a rabbi. And if she joined a crowd, everybody would be drawing themselves away from her, so they wouldn't be unclean too. So you know the story. She sneaked up behind him and touched the hem of his garment. And it says, and in the same moment that she touched him, the flow of blood stopped. So she had her healing. In that moment, she had her healing. She had exactly what she wanted. But what does Jesus do? Jesus says, who touched me? Of course, it's not like he doesn't know. Who touched me, he said. And the disciples going, everybody's touching you. And he's like, no. Who touched me with intentionality? And it says, and the woman, seeing that she could no longer hide from Jesus, fell on her knees before him. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Why? She'd already got the healing, so he wasn't talking about that. The issue of blood had already stopped. When he called her daughter, he took her shame. He took all of that isolation. He took all of that fear. He drew her back into the community. The rabbi had called her daughter. The rabbi had proclaimed her clean. What had he done? He'd gone into the place of the pain to heal all of the shame and the fear, because it wasn't enough for Jesus to heal her body. He wanted more. Just like it wasn't enough for Jesus when my body didn't look like that, but more or less like this. That wasn't enough. What he wanted to do was to go into that place and say, daughter, daughter. And that for me is so incredibly important, because if your Father has never approved of you and loved you and validated you, when Jesus calls you daughter, yeah, that's healing. That's healing. Surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. And do you know what? I got this amazing opportunity to come and work at Beauty from Ashes, and I thought, oh, glory to God, this is it. My life. This is it. This is everything I dreamed of. This is everything I wanted. You know, all that disappointment that I felt, God's finally. And then 2 years later, my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I've just kind of spent 2 years, really, walking that through the valley of the shadow of death, back to waiting. And I'm like, what were you doing? You gave me all this healing. You put me in this place. And now I can't even go outside my own front door. What's going on? Waiting. Again, Lord, why am I waiting? I'm going to be really honest with you now. I don't quite have all the answers to that question yet. I really don't. Waiting for God. Sometimes I think that we imagine that we're waiting for God when actually God's waiting for us. Jen was waiting for God to heal her. God was waiting for Jen to ask him into the place of the pain. So we're just going to bring this kind of part of the meeting really to a close. Just going to pray. And then we would love you to come forward. If there's something that you would like someone to pray with you, something that's in your pain place, we would love to pray with you. If that was you, that picture of the person that was tying all the extra ropes around their pain box this morning. Because sometimes that's what we do, isn't it? When we suddenly see our pain chest, our pain cupboard, we try and tie a few extra ropes around it because it's like, no, not going to open that. But let's just give him an opportunity now and just see what healing he wants to do. Surely, he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. So just close your eyes and just let yourself connect with Jesus. Turn your affection towards him. The only one that has the power to take our pain and give us back the comfort and the healing that we need. So right now, just take one thing, just one thing of pain that's in your pain cupboard. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I told you about the big stuff in my life, but just take that one thing that was a grief or a disappointment or a shame or a hurt or a failure. Take that one thing. Just imagine that you're holding it in your hands as if it were, you know when you go 10-pin bowling, you have those great big heavy balls. Just imagine that thing you're holding in your hands right now looks like that heavy bowling ball. Just feel that in your hands. Surely, he has borne our grief and carried our sorrow. And when you feel that the moment's ready, just see yourself reaching out and putting that bowling ball that represents the pain, just see yourself putting it into the hands of Jesus. Those lovely hands with the marks of the nails in his palms. See yourself putting it into Jesus' hands. And just notice what Jesus does with it. Let him show you what he's going to do. now that he's got that piece of pain and not you. Just see what he's going to do. And now, just like the woman with the issue of blood, just ask him, what does he want to give you in exchange for that pain? What does he have for you in exchange for that pain? Let him show you what it is. Let him put that, whatever he has for you, let him transfer that to the inside of you. Just for a minute, just feel what a difference that exchange has made. And right now, just look into Jesus' face and hear him say to you, daughter. Look into the face of Jesus and hear him say to you, daughter. Daughter. When you're a daughter, when you're the daughter of the King, you have rights, you have inheritance, you have access. That's who you are. Let him say to you, daughter, daughter, daughter. Jesus, we thank you. Jesus, we thank you that you are the one that bears our grief and carries our sorrow. We thank you that your heart is to call us daughter. We bless you. We thank you. We thank you that our bowling balls are now safe with you and that your comfort is in that place. As we go forth from here, Jesus, let us walk as daughters, not creeping up behind your back so no one will see us, but bold to look into your face as cherished daughters. Amen.